For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council had sent invitations to Earth. Every single time, they received the same response: silence. The humans never showed up to any summit, never acknowledged any diplomatic contact, never even sent a polite no thank you. The galaxy's greatest minds debated endlessly. Were humans extinct? Too primitive to understand? Simply arrogant? Some whispered darker theories that Earth was quarantined for a reason, that something terrible lurked in that forgotten corner of space. But, on Summit Day 3847, as representatives from 12,000 worlds gathered to discuss humanity's continued absence, the debate ended forever. 2,000 ships materialized above the Council station. Not around it. Not approaching it. Above it, in perfect geometric formation, having somehow bypassed every sensor, every defense grid, every early warning system in known space. The ships bore no resemblance to any known design. They were massive, angular things that seemed to bend light around their edges, crafted from materials that made scanners scream in confusion. And they were absolutely, undeniably silent until a single transmission cut across every communication channel in the galaxy. Apologies for our tardiness. Earth accepts your invitation. We're ready to talk. The galaxy had spent millennia wondering where humanity was. They were about to discover they'd been asking the wrong question entirely. The real question wasn't where humanity was, it was where they'd been going. And the answer would terrify and amaze every species that thought they understood what it meant to reach for the stars. Ambassador Kethvar of the Zilithian Collective had attended 47 Galactic Council summits. He'd seen every possible diplomatic crisis, from trade wars to succession conflicts to the infamous Great Pronunciation Incident that nearly sparked a galactic war over the proper way to say "please pass the quantum particles." But nothing had prepared him for the sight outside the massive observation deck of Council Station Prime. 2,000 human ships hung in space like geometric shadows against the stars. Each vessel stretched nearly 2 kilometers in length, their angular hulls seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. They'd appeared without warning, without the typical energy signatures of faster-than-light travel, without even the basic courtesy of requesting permission to approach. One moment space had been empty except for the usual traffic of diplomatic shuttles and escort frigates. The next moment, humanity had announced its presence with the most impressive display of force the galaxy had ever witnessed. "Are they hostile?" whispered Ambassador Naira, her forearms trembling as her species always did when nervous. The Kepler delegation had retreated to the far side of the observation deck, their normally bold demeanor replaced by obvious fear. Kethvar studied the formation through his enhanced optical implants. "They're not targeting anything. No weapons charged, no aggressive posturing. But the positioning." He paused, analyzing the mathematical precision of their arrangement. "It's a perfect dodecahedron formation. Each ship positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire while maintaining optimal defensive coverage. This isn't random. This is military precision that suggests centuries of tactical development." The assembled diplomatic corps buzzed with tension and confusion. Representatives from 12,000 worlds had gathered for what was supposed to be a routine summit discussing trade regulations and minor territorial disputes. The agenda had included, as it had for the past 3 millennia, a brief discussion about humanity's continued absence from galactic affairs. It was largely ceremonial at this point, a bureaucratic acknowledgement that Earth existed but remained stubbornly isolated. Dr. Vex Marillion, the station's chief xenobiologist and one of the few beings who'd actually studied humanity, pushed through the crowd. His insectoid features clicked with excitement as he approached the viewing port. "This changes everything we thought we knew about human development. Our last intelligence report suggested they'd barely achieved reliable interplanetary travel within their own solar system. The energy requirements alone for this kind of fleet deployment should be beyond their technological capabilities." "Unless our intelligence was wrong," Kethvar replied grimly. "Unless it's been wrong for a very long time." The truth was uncomfortable. For centuries, the Galactic Council had maintained monitoring stations at the edge of human space, but those stations had detected exactly what they'd expected to detect: a slowly developing civilization struggling with basic space travel, crude fusion engines, and primitive communication systems. The humans had shown no interest in venturing beyond their immediate solar neighborhood, content to build habitats around their gas giants and establish mining operations on various asteroids. Nothing they'd observed suggested capability for fleet construction on this scale. Commander Zex of the Altarian Defense Fleet stood rigid, his species' military bearing evident despite his obvious bewilderment. Those ship designs don't match any known configuration in our databases. The materials appear to be some form of crystalline metallic composite that our sensors can't properly analyze. And the energy signatures. He gestured helplessly at his portable scanner. They're not using any form of propulsion we recognize. No exhaust, no energy discharge, no gravitational distortion. It's as if they're existing in space without actually occupying it in any conventional sense. The communication system crackled to life, causing several ambassadors to jump in surprise. A calm, distinctly human voice filled the observation deck with words that would be remembered throughout galactic history. Council Station Prime, this is Fleet Admiral Sarah Chen of the Earth Void Navy. We apologize for our dramatic arrival, but we wanted to ensure we had everyone's attention. We've been monitoring your communications for some time and understand that our absence from previous summits has caused concern and speculation. We're prepared to address all questions and begin formal diplomatic relations with the Galactic Council. The silence that followed was profound. Kefvar found himself struggling to process the implications. Earth Void Navy suggested military organization and capability far beyond anything their intelligence had suggested. The casual mention of monitoring galactic communications implied technological sophistication that should have been detected by Council surveillance systems. Ambassador THYSS of the Quantum Collective, whose species prided itself on logical analysis, finally broke the silence. Admiral Chen, we welcome Earth's decision to join galactic diplomatic proceedings. However, we must express confusion regarding the scale and nature of your arrival. Our understanding was that humanity had achieved only limited spaceflight capability. The fleet you've brought suggests technological advancement that our monitoring systems should have detected during development. There was a pause before Chen responded, and, when she did, there was a note of amusement in her voice that somehow made her words more unsettling. Ambassador THYSS, you're absolutely correct that your monitoring systems should have detected our advancement. The fact that they didn't detect it should tell you something important about the limitations of those systems. We've been aware of your observation posts for approximately 800 years. We've been careful to ensure they saw exactly what we wanted them to see. The implications hit the assembled diplomats like a physical blow. If humanity had been deliberately concealing their technological advancement for 8 centuries, it suggested planning and patience that defied conventional understanding of species development patterns. Most civilizations revealed their capabilities gradually as they developed, unable to hide the energy signatures and resource requirements of advanced technology. The idea that an entire species could maintain such deception for centuries was nearly inconceivable. Dr. Marillion's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among his kind. Admiral, are you suggesting that humanity has been deliberately maintaining the appearance of technological primitiveness while secretly developing advanced spacefaring capability? Doctor, humanity learned early that the galaxy can be a dangerous place for species that reveal their capabilities prematurely. We studied your histories, your conflicts, your patterns of interaction. We observed how advanced species treated those they perceived as inferior, how technology transfers were controlled, how political alliances formed around perceived strength or weakness. We decided it would be wiser to develop our capabilities quietly until we were ready to engage as equals rather than supplicants. The strategic implications were staggering. Kefvar realized they were dealing with a species that had essentially conducted an 800-year intelligence operation against the entire galactic community. The patience and coordination required for such an undertaking suggested psychological and cultural characteristics unlike anything in the Council's experience. Where have you been developing this technology? Commander Zex demanded, his military training overriding diplomatic protocol. Our deep space sensors would have detected construction projects on this scale within your solar system. Chen's response carried a note of satisfaction. Commander, that's an excellent question. The answer is that we haven't been developing our technology within our solar system. We've been developing it in the space between stars, in regions your species consider empty and worthless. What you call the void, we've learned to call home. The revelation sent shocked murmurs through the diplomatic corps. Interstellar space was considered largely useless by most galactic civilizations, too far from resources and too difficult to access for meaningful development. The energy costs of maintaining permanent installations in the deep void were considered prohibitive by conventional understanding. The void between stars contains resources most species ignore because they're difficult to access using conventional technology, Chen continued. dark matter concentrations, quantum field fluctuations, exotic particle streams, the energy differential between absolute vacuum and quantum foam. Once you develop the right techniques, interstellar space becomes the galaxy's greatest industrial resource. We've been building our civilization there for centuries, completely outside the detection range of systems designed to monitor planetary and stellar activity. Ambassador Naira's voice was barely a whisper. How many of you are there? The pause before Chen answered seemed to stretch into eternity. Ambassador, that's classified information at this point in our diplomatic relationship. What I can tell you is that the 2,000 ships you see represent a tiny fraction of our total capability. We wanted to make an impression without causing panic. Kethvar felt his understanding of galactic power dynamics shifting beneath him. If Chen was telling the truth, humanity hadn't just hidden their technological development, they'd built an entirely separate civilization in the empty spaces between stars, invisible to every monitoring system the Council possessed. The strategic advantages such a position would provide were almost unimaginable. Why reveal yourselves now? He asked, dreading the answer. Chen's response was immediate and carried implications that would haunt diplomatic discussions for years to come. Because, Ambassador, our intelligence indicates the galaxy is approaching a crisis that threatens all known civilizations. It's time for humanity to take its place in galactic affairs, because very soon, you're going to need our help whether you want it or not. The observation deck fell silent as the assembled diplomats contemplated a future where humanity emerged not as junior partners seeking guidance, but as a mysterious power with capabilities beyond current understanding and knowledge of threats the galaxy hadn't yet recognized. Outside the viewing ports, 2,000 impossible ships waited patiently for the galaxy's response to humanity's long overdue introduction. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened 3 hours after Admiral Chen's ominous declaration. Representatives from major civilizations filled the amphitheater while their respective fleets maintained cautious distances from the human formation. The tension was thick enough to cut with a plasma blade, and everyone seemed acutely aware that they were witnessing a pivotal moment in galactic history. High Counselor Zayrath of the Draconian Empire called the session to order, his reptilian features showing unusual strain. As the Council's senior member and representative of one of the galaxy's oldest spacefaring civilizations, he'd seen the rise and fall of dozens of species. Nothing in his extensive experience had prepared him for this situation. Admiral Chen, the Council appreciates your willingness to finally engage in diplomatic relations. However, your statement regarding an approaching crisis requires immediate clarification. What specific threat are you referring to, and why hasn't the Council's intelligence network detected it? Admiral Chen materialized on the main display as a hologram, transmitted directly from her flagship. She was smaller than most Council members had expected, appearing to be middle-aged by human standards with gray streaking through her dark hair. Her uniform was unlike anything in the galactic database, deep blue with silver accents that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. Most unsettling were her eyes, which held the patience of someone accustomed to thinking in centuries rather than years. High Counselor, I need to provide context for you to understand the nature of the threat. Approximately 400 years ago, our deep void monitoring systems detected anomalous energy signatures from the galactic rim. Initially, we assumed these were natural phenomena, stellar collapses, neutron star formations, the usual cosmic events. However, pattern analysis revealed something disturbing. The energy signatures were too regular, too organized, too purposeful to be natural. Dr. Marillion leaned forward in his seat. What kind of patterns? Shen gestured, and the holographic display shifted to show a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red dots appeared along the outer rim, forming a rough arc that seemed to be slowly contracting inward. Systematic destruction of stellar systems, proceeding in a deliberate pattern designed to consume resources while eliminating potential resistance. Whatever is causing this follows a clear strategy: identify systems with useful materials, harvest everything of value, then move to the next target. The affected regions show complete stellar engineering, stars dismantled for energy, planets stripped down to their cores, entire systems reduced to organized collections of raw materials. The assembled diplomats stared at the display in growing horror. The red dots represented hundreds of star systems, billions of potential lives, entire civilizations that might have been erased without the galaxy ever knowing they'd existed. Why didn't our deep space monitoring detect this? Demanded Commander Zex, his military instincts clearly alarmed by the implications. Because, Chen replied calmly, your monitoring systems are designed to detect activities within established space lanes and around known civilizations. The affected systems are in regions your species consider too remote and resource-poor to be worth monitoring. The attackers are deliberately targeting areas where their actions won't be noticed by major galactic powers until it's too late. Ambassador HFY studied the pattern with growing unease. The progression rate suggests they're moving inward at increasing speed. At this rate of expansion, they'll reach inhabited space within 50 to 75 years, Chen confirmed. Possibly less if they accelerate their operations. Our projections suggest they're building momentum, using the resources from each consumed system to expand their capabilities for the next target. High Counselor Zarath's claws scraped against his chair's armrests. Why didn't humanity report this threat when you first detected it? 400 years of advanced warning could have allowed the Council to prepare defenses, evacuate threatened systems, coordinate a galactic response. Chen's expression remained neutral, but her voice carried a note of steel. High Counselor, 400 years ago humanity attempted to establish communication with the Council regarding potential threats. Your response was to dismiss our messages as primitive attempts to gain attention and access to advanced technology. The exact words used by the Council's communication department were barely coherent attempts by an isolated species to gain relevance in galactic affairs. The silence that followed was deafening. Several ambassadors shifted uncomfortably as the implications of past diplomatic failures became clear. Furthermore, Chen continued, our analysis of galactic defensive capabilities suggested that even with 4 centuries of preparation, conventional military responses would be inadequate against this threat. The energy signatures we've detected suggest technological capabilities that exceed anything in current Council databases. We determined that direct engagement would require unconventional approaches and resources that most species couldn't provide. Dr. Marillion's scientific curiosity overcame his diplomatic caution. What exactly are we facing? Your description suggests some form of stellar engineering capability, but the scale and coordination required would be beyond any known technology. The holographic display shifted again, showing detailed sensor readings and energy analysis charts. Our best analysis suggests we're dealing with a form of technological intelligence that views stellar systems as consumable resources. They appear to operate on a scale that treats entire solar systems as raw material for construction projects. The engineering signatures suggest they can disassemble stars in a matter of decades and convert the resulting energy and matter into fleet units and mobile infrastructure. Ambassador THYSS of the Quantum Collective processed this information with her species' characteristic logical approach. If your analysis is correct, conventional defensive strategies would be ineffective. Fleet-to-fleet combat against an enemy capable of stellar engineering would be like insects attacking a demolition crew. Precisely, Chun agreed. This is why humanity has spent centuries developing unconventional approaches. Our void-based civilization gives us capabilities that surface-bound species can't easily replicate. We can operate in environments where conventional technology fails, draw resources from regions most species can't access, and maintain industrial capacity that's inherently mobile and difficult to target. Commander Zex leaned forward aggressively. What you're describing sounds like preparation for a war that hasn't started yet. How do we know humanity isn't exaggerating this threat to justify your own military buildup? Chen's smile was cold but not unfriendly. Commander, that's an excellent question that deserves a clear answer. If humanity wanted to threaten galactic civilization, we wouldn't need to invent external enemies. The fleet you see outside represents technology that could single-handedly defeat any known military force in Council space. If we had hostile intentions, this conversation would be very different. The truth of her statement was undeniable. The casual confidence with which Chun discussed humanity's military capabilities suggested overwhelming technological advantage. If they'd wanted conquest, they could have simply taken whatever they desired without bothering with diplomatic niceties. What do you propose? High Counselor Zarath asked, his tone showing grudging respect for humanity's position. Joint preparation for a threat that requires every available resource in the galaxy, Chen replied immediately. Humanity has been developing countermeasures for centuries, but we can't do this alone. We need Council cooperation to implement defensive strategies on a galactic scale. We need access to Council databases to better understand the full scope of civilization that needs protecting. Most importantly, we need the Council to begin taking unconventional approaches to defense preparation seriously. Ambassador Naira spoke up hesitantly. What kind of unconventional approaches? Chen's expression became serious. technologies and strategies that challenge fundamental assumptions about how space warfare should be conducted. Weapons systems that operate on principles most species consider theoretically impossible. Defensive installations that exist in dimensions conventional sensors can't detect. Industrial processes that utilize the quantum structure of space itself as raw material. The implications were staggering. Humanity was offering to share technology that apparently operated beyond current understanding of physics, but only in the context of preparing for a threat that might not arrive for decades. Why should the Council trust humanity's assessment of this threat? Ambassador THYSS asked bluntly. You've admitted to conducting centuries of deception regarding your capabilities. How do we verify that this crisis isn't another aspect of human manipulation? Chen nodded approvingly. That's exactly the right question, Ambassador. The answer is simple. We're prepared to provide verification that will satisfy even the most skeptical analysis. We're willing to share our sensor data, escort Council observation teams to the affected regions, and demonstrate some of our defensive technologies under controlled conditions. Transparency regarding the threat, though not necessarily regarding all aspects of our capabilities. She paused, letting the significance of her offer sink in. However, this verification process will require time we may not have. Every day spent in debate and bureaucratic review is another day the threat moves closer to inhabited space. We need to begin preparation immediately while verification proceeds in parallel. High Counselor Zayrath considered the situation carefully. What specific preparations are you proposing? Immediate establishment of joint research programs focused on unconventional physics applications. Expansion of deep space monitoring networks using human technology to provide early warning capability. Begin construction of defensive installations in key strategic locations using combined Council and human resources. Most critically, establish training programs to prepare Council military forces for combat scenarios that exceed current tactical doctrine. The scope of humanity's proposal was breathtaking. They were essentially offering to revolutionize galactic defensive capability while maintaining enough secrecy to protect their most sensitive capabilities. It was simultaneously the most generous and most manipulative diplomatic offer in Council history. The Council needs time to consider this proposal, Zayrath declared. We'll reconvene in 48 hours for initial responses from major civilizations. Chen's hologram nodded. High Counselor, that's acceptable. However, I should mention that our fleets will remain in position until we receive a formal response. We want to ensure that the Council takes our offers seriously, and our presence serves as a reminder that the Galaxy's strategic situation has changed permanently. As the session ended and diplomats filed out in worried clusters, everyone understood that the old galactic order was over. Humanity had emerged from the void with capabilities that challenged every assumption about power, technology, and the nature of civilization itself. Whether they were saviors offering protection against an unimaginable threat or conquerors using fear to justify dominance, one thing was certain: the galaxy would never be the same. Outside the station, 2,000 impossible ships maintained their perfect formation, patient and watchful as the cosmos itself. 48 hours after Admiral Chen's revelation, the diplomatic situation had deteriorated into barely controlled chaos. The Council chambers buzzed with heated arguments as representatives struggled to process the implications of humanity's emergence. Private communications between major powers revealed a galaxy-spanning crisis of confidence as established assumptions about power and security crumbled. Ambassador Kethvar found himself in an uncomfortable position as his government demanded answers he couldn't provide. The Zalithian Collective had built their entire diplomatic strategy around being intermediaries between major powers, but humanity's arrival had rendered traditional balance of power calculations meaningless. How do you negotiate with a species that claims to have been watching you for centuries while building impossible technology in the empty spaces between stars? The verification process had begun immediately, with human escorts guiding Council observation teams toward the affected regions of the galactic rim. The first reports were filtering back, and they were uniformly terrifying. Dr. Vex Marillion led the primary scientific investigation team, and his preliminary findings had sent shockwaves through the Council's intelligence services. The destruction patterns are unlike anything in our historical records, Marillion reported via quantum communication from the observation vessel Clarity of Purpose. Entire stellar systems have been systematically dismantled with precision that suggests technological capability orders of magnitude beyond current galactic standards. The energy signatures Admiral Chen described are confirmed, and they're getting stronger as the affected region expands. High Counselor Zayrath reviewed the incoming data with growing alarm. Images showed solar systems reduced to geometric arrangements of processed materials, stars converted into artificial energy collectors, planets transformed into perfect spheres of organized resources. The scale of engineering required was beyond conventional comprehension. How long would it take our most advanced civilizations to accomplish similar engineering projects? Zayrath asked his military advisors. Working together, with unlimited resources and no other priorities, we estimate it would take approximately 3,000 years to dismantle and process a single stellar system to this degree of completion, reported General Valax of the Combined Council Defense Force. The enemy is accomplishing this level of processing in approximately 30 to 50 years per system. The mathematical implications were staggering. If the attacking force could process stellar systems 100 times faster than the Galaxies' combined civilizations working together, conventional resistance would be futile. Any defensive strategy would need to operate on principles that exceeded current understanding of technological possibility. Meanwhile, humanity had begun demonstrating their proposed defensive technologies under carefully controlled conditions. Admiral Chen had established a testing area in deep space, far from any inhabited systems, where Council observers could witness capabilities that challenged basic physics. Commanders X watched through enhanced sensors as human ships demonstrated what they called dimensional displacement technology. The vessels simply vanished from conventional space, disappeared from all known forms of detection, then reappeared in completely different locations without any apparent transit time. Energy readings suggested they weren't using conventional faster-than-light travel but something that operated outside normal spacetime. "This is impossible according to our understanding of physics," muttered Dr. Shinkai, the Council's chief physicist. "Objects can't simply cease to exist in one location and begin existing in another without some form of intermediate state or energy expenditure that we should be able to detect." Admiral Chen's voice came through the communication system with what sounded like amusement. "Dr. Shen, your understanding of physics isn't wrong, it's just incomplete. Conventional space is only one layer of reality. When you develop technology that can access deeper dimensional structures, movement becomes a matter of repositioning your existence rather than traversing distance." The demonstration continued with increasingly impossible displays. Human ships created barriers that deflected energy weapons while remaining completely invisible to sensors. They generated gravitational fields without any detectable mass source. Most unsettling, they demonstrated the ability to exist in multiple locations simultaneously, with single vessels appearing on sensors in dozens of different positions while clearly maintaining singular consciousness and control. How long has humanity possessed these capabilities? Commander Zex demanded, his military mind struggling to comprehend the strategic implications. "These particular applications have been in development for approximately 200 years, Chen replied casually. Though the theoretical foundations go back much further. Void-based civilization requires unconventional approaches to almost everything: energy generation, resource extraction, manufacturing, defense. When you're building industrial capacity in regions where conventional physics says nothing should be able to exist, you develop new ways of understanding how reality works." The observation team returned to Council Station with reports that fundamentally altered galactic understanding of what was technologically possible. Humanity hadn't just hidden their advancement, they developed along technological paths that other species had never imagined pursuing. Dr. Marillion's xenobiological analysis provided additional context that made the situation even more complex. Human neural development shows adaptations for processing multidimensional information and maintaining consciousness across distributed physical states. These aren't recent genetic modifications, they're evolutionary changes that would require thousands of years to develop naturally. Humanity has been adapting to void-based existence far longer than they've admitted. The implications hit the Council like a physical blow. If humans had been evolving for extended void-based existence for millennia, their emergence wasn't a recent development but the culmination of a species-wide transformation that had been proceeding in complete secrecy for geological time periods. High Counselor Zayrath called for an emergency session to address the verification results and humanity's formal proposal for joint defensive preparations. The amphitheater was packed with representatives who looked increasingly uncertain about their traditional assumptions regarding galactic civilization. "Admiral Chen," Zayrath began, "the verification process has confirmed both the existence of the threat you described and the effectiveness of your proposed countermeasures. However, the scope of what you're offering suggests capabilities that exceed our current understanding of scientific possibility. Before the Council can formally accept joint defensive preparations, we need to understand the true extent of human technological advancement. Chen's hologram appeared with what might have been a slight smile. High Counselor, that's a fair request that requires a complex answer. Human technological advancement operates on principles that most Council species would find uncomfortable. We've learned to treat fundamental concepts like individual existence, linear time, and exclusive spatial occupation as flexible guidelines rather than absolute rules. She gestured, and the holographic display showed images of human void installations that defied conventional description. Massive structures existed in overlapping dimensional states, appearing to occupy the same space simultaneously while clearly performing different functions. Industrial facilities processed materials that conventional sensors couldn't detect, drawing resources from quantum fluctuations and dimensional interfaces. Our civilization doesn't just exist in the void between stars, Chen explained. We exist between dimensions, between conventional states of reality, in spaces that most species can't perceive and wouldn't want to inhabit. This gives us access to resources and capabilities that surface-bound civilizations can't duplicate. Ambassador THYSS studied the images with her characteristic logical approach. Are you saying that humanity has fundamentally altered its relationship with physical reality? Ambassador, we've learned that physical reality is far more flexible than most species assume. When your entire civilization depends on existing in environments where conventional physics says life is impossible, you develop new relationships with the fundamental structures of existence. We've been forced to become something more than a traditional biological species in order to survive and thrive in the deep void. The revelation that humanity had essentially transcended conventional physical limitations while maintaining their essential character and consciousness was perhaps the most unsettling aspect of their emergence. They weren't just technologically advanced, they'd become something that operated on principles beyond current galactic understanding. Commander Zax voiced the question everyone was thinking. If humanity possesses these capabilities, why do you need Council cooperation for defensive preparations? Why not simply handle the threat yourselves? Chen's expression became serious. Commander, that's an excellent question with a sobering answer. The approaching threat operates on similar principles to our own technology. They've also learned to transcend conventional physical limitations, and their capabilities are growing faster than ours. Fighting them requires resources and perspectives that no single species can provide, even one as adapted as humanity has become. She paused, letting the implications sink in. The enemy isn't just technologically advanced, they're evolving in real time, adapting their capabilities with each system they consume. By the time they reach inhabited space, they may possess capabilities that exceed even our unconventional approaches. We need the Galaxies' combined knowledge, resources, and perspectives to develop countermeasures that can match their rate of adaptation. The amphitheater fell silent as diplomats contemplated a threat that had driven humanity to reveal capabilities they'd hidden for centuries. If beings capable of existing between dimensions and accessing impossible technologies were concerned about their ability to provide adequate defense, the approaching enemy represented a challenge unlike anything the galaxy had ever faced. High Counselor Zarath made the decision that would define the galaxy's future. Admiral Chen, the Council formally accepts your proposal for joint defensive preparations. We'll begin immediate implementation of combined research programs and defensive installation construction. However, we'll need full technological sharing agreements and integrated command structures to make this cooperation effective. Chen nodded with what looked like relief. High Counselor, that's exactly what we hope to hear. Humanity is prepared to share all relevant defensive technologies and integrate our command systems with Council military structures. The threat we're facing requires unprecedented cooperation, and we're committed to making that cooperation succeed. As the session ended and implementation planning began, everyone understood that the galaxy had crossed a threshold from which there could be no return. Humanity's emergence had revealed both the existence of threats beyond imagination and the possibility of defenses that transcended conventional understanding. The next phase of galactic civilization would be unlike anything that had come before, shaped by cooperation between species that existed in different relationships with reality itself. Outside Council Station, 2,000 human ships began subtle movements that indicated preparation for departure. Their mission of diplomatic contact was complete. Now the real work would begin. 6 months after the formal alliance agreement, the galaxy had transformed into something unrecognizable. Joint Human Council research stations materialized in previously empty sectors, their hybrid architecture reflecting the merger of conventional engineering with humanity's impossible dimensional technologies. The cooperation was proceeding faster than anyone had expected, but the approaching threat was also proving more complex than initial projections had suggested. Dr. Vex Marillion found himself working alongside human researchers whose thought processes challenged every assumption about scientific methodology. The joint research facility orbiting the neutron star Kepler 442 operated according to principles that would have been considered fictional 6 months earlier, but were producing results that exceeded the wildest projections of conventional science. The quantum resonance chambers are showing energy outputs that violate conservation laws, Dr. Elena Vasquez explained to the assembled research team. The human physicist existed in a state that still made Marillion uncomfortable, her consciousness somehow distributed across multiple dimensional states while maintaining perfect coherence and communication capability. We're successfully extracting usable energy from quantum vacuum fluctuations at an efficiency rate that shouldn't be possible according to traditional thermodynamics. Her colleague, Dr. Marcus Webb, existed in an even more disturbing state. His physical form flickered between dimensions while his voice remained perfectly stable. The key is understanding that conservation laws only apply within single-dimensional frameworks. When you can access multiple dimensional layers simultaneously, energy becomes available from sources that conventional physics can't detect. The joint research teams had made breakthrough discoveries that revolutionized galactic understanding of technological possibility. Dimensional displacement drives that could move entire fleets instantaneously across galactic distances. Defensive barriers that existed in overlapping dimensional states, providing protection against attacks that operated on multiple reality layers simultaneously. Most importantly, detection systems that could identify threats operating outside conventional spacetime. Ambassador Kethvar observed the research progress during his regular diplomatic visits, struggling to comprehend how rapidly the galaxy's strategic situation was evolving. The human researchers worked with an intensity that suggested urgency beyond what their stated timeline should require, and their council colleagues were adapting to unconventional methodologies with disturbing ease. "How quickly are your people learning to work with human technology?" he asked Dr. Marillion during a private conversation. "Faster than should be possible," Marillion admitted, his mandibles clicking with nervous energy. "Human teaching methods involve some form of consciousness sharing that allows direct transfer of understanding rather than conventional learning processes. My research team is developing intuitive comprehension of multidimensional physics that normally requires decades of theoretical study." The implications were troubling. Human integration wasn't just sharing technology, it was fundamentally altering the way council species understood reality itself. The volunteers working in joint research programs were returning to their home worlds with perspectives that their own people found increasingly difficult to relate to. Commander Zex faced similar challenges in the military integration programs. Human combat doctrine operated on principles that challenged every assumption about tactical thinking, and council military personnel were adapting to these new approaches with an efficiency that worried their commanding officers. Human combat training involves learning to think in multiple timeline probabilities simultaneously, he reported to the Council Defense Committee. "Our pilots are developing the ability to perceive potential battle outcomes across various dimensional states and select actions that optimize results across all possible reality layers. The effectiveness improvement is remarkable, but the psychological impact on personnel is concerning." High Counselor Zerath reviewed reports that painted a picture of galactic civilization undergoing rapid evolution under human influence. The joint defensive preparations were succeeding beyond all projections, but the cost seemed to be the fundamental transformation of participating species into something that resembled humanity's multidimensional existence. "Are we becoming something other than what we were?" he asked Admiral Chen during their weekly strategy sessions. Chen's response was characteristically direct. "High Counselor, evolution is always the price of survival. The threat we're preparing to face operates on principles that conventional consciousness can't comprehend. Fighting them requires developing similar capabilities, which means accepting fundamental changes to how your species exist and think." She gestured toward displays showing the approaching threat's latest activities. The destruction patterns had accelerated dramatically, with entire stellar regions being processed in timeframes that defied previous estimates. More disturbing, the energy signatures suggested the enemy was also evolving, developing new capabilities based on resources they'd consumed. "The latest intelligence indicates they're not just harvesting stellar systems for materials," Chen continued. "They're somehow extracting and incorporating the essential characteristics of civilizations they encounter. Their technology is becoming more sophisticated with each system they consume, and their strategic thinking is showing adaptation that suggests learning from each encounter. Dr. Marillion's updated analysis confirmed Shen's assessment. The enemy's progression shows clear evidence of cumulative development. They're not just destroying civilizations, they're integrating useful characteristics into their own operational framework. If this pattern continues, by the time they reach inhabited space they'll possess combined capabilities from hundreds of destroyed civilizations. The revelation that the approaching threat was essentially evolving into a hybrid of every civilization it consumed added urgency to the defensive preparations. Simple military resistance would be inadequate against an enemy that incorporated the best characteristics of every species it encountered. How do we fight an enemy that becomes stronger with each victory? Commander Zex asked bluntly. By becoming something it can't predict or understand, Shen replied. The enemy's adaptation strategy assumes conventional development patterns and logical technological progression. Humanity's unconventional existence gives us advantages they can't anticipate because our development path doesn't follow rules they understand. The joint research programs had begun producing weapons systems and defensive technologies that operated on principles the approaching threat couldn't have encountered. Weapons that attacked targets across multiple dimensional states simultaneously. Defensive installations that existed in quantum superposition, making them impossible to target effectively. Most critically, communication systems that operated through consciousness linkage rather than conventional transmission, making them immune to technological interference. But, the most significant development was the evolution of the Council species themselves. Extended exposure to human research methods and dimensional technologies was triggering adaptive changes that appeared to be permanent. Council personnel working in joint programs were developing enhanced cognitive capabilities, improved pattern recognition, and, most unsettling, the ability to perceive reality from multidimensional perspectives. My research team is reporting that they can now detect dimensional interfaces that human technology revealed, Dr. Marillion explained during a progress briefing. We're not just learning to use human technology, we're developing the perceptual capabilities that make such technology possible in the first place. Ambassador THYSS raised the obvious concern. Are these changes reversible? If Council species continue evolving in this direction, will we remain recognizably ourselves? Shen's answer was both reassuring and disturbing. Ambassador, the changes are adaptations that enhance existing capabilities rather than replacing them. Your species retain their essential characteristics while gaining access to expanded perceptual ranges. Humanity went through similar development over thousands of years. Your species are simply achieving in months what took us millennia. The acceleration of evolutionary adaptation suggested that the approaching crisis was triggering rapid development across all participating species. The galaxy was essentially evolving in real time to meet a threat that required capabilities beyond conventional understanding. Timeline projections indicate the enemy will reach the first inhabited systems in approximately 18 months, Chen announced during the latest strategy session. Our defensive preparations need to be fully operational before then. This means accelerating both technological development and personnel adaptation programs. High Counselor Zayrath made the decision that would define his species' future. Admiral Chen, the Council authorizes immediate implementation of advanced adaptation programs for all personnel involved in defensive preparations. If evolution is required for survival, then evolution is what we'll embrace. The command went out across the galaxy as participating civilizations committed to fundamental transformation rather than conventional resistance. Research stations expanded their consciousness sharing programs. Military units increased their dimensional combat training. Industrial facilities began incorporating human multidimensional engineering techniques. 6 months earlier, the galaxy had been a collection of separate civilizations pursuing individual development paths. Now it was becoming something unprecedented, a hybrid consciousness capable of existing and operating across multiple dimensional states while maintaining the diverse strengths that each species contributed. The transformation was accelerating as the approaching threat grew closer. Council species were evolving at rates that should have required geological time periods, developing capabilities that their ancestors would have considered impossible. The joint defensive preparations were succeeding, but success came with the price of becoming something entirely new. Admiral Chen observed the galactic transformation with satisfaction and some concern. Humanity's emergence had triggered exactly the evolutionary acceleration required to face the approaching threat. But, even she couldn't predict what the galaxy would become when conventional civilization gave way to multidimensional hybrid consciousness. The enemy expects to encounter conventional civilizations with predictable capabilities, she explained to her human command staff. Instead, they'll face something that has never existed before, a galactic consciousness that can think and act across dimensional boundaries while maintaining the creative diversity that conventional evolution produces. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just the galaxy's survival, but the future evolution of consciousness itself. In 18 months, everything would change forever. 18 months later, the galaxy held its breath as the approaching threat finally entered inhabited space. The first contact occurred in the Outer Rim territories, where frontier colonies had been evacuated and replaced with defensive installations that represented the pinnacle of human council collaboration. What happened in those initial encounters would reshape understanding of warfare, consciousness, and the nature of existence itself. Admiral Chen commanded the Joint Defensive Fleet from her flagship Dimensional Sovereignty, a vessel that existed simultaneously in 17 different dimensional states while maintaining perfect tactical coordination. Around her, the combined fleet represented a fusion of technologies that should have been impossible: human dimensional manipulation integrated with council computational power, draconian strategic thinking, Silithian diplomatic protocols adapted for combat coordination, and quantum collective probability analysis applied to multidimensional warfare. Enemy contact confirmed, reported Commander Zex from the Tactical Coordination Center. His consciousness now operated across multiple probability streams simultaneously, allowing him to perceive potential battle outcomes before they occurred. Initial analysis confirms our worst projections. They've incorporated characteristics from approximately 400 destroyed civilizations. The enemy fleet materialized in normal space like a nightmare made manifest. Ships that defied classification stretched across impossible distances while maintaining perfect geometric formations. Their hull showed evidence of technological integration from dozens of species: crystalline Etherian energy systems merged with Kethdar biological technology, Vorthan temporal manipulation combined with extinct Xerian dimensional engineering. They're not just using absorbed technology, Dr. Elena Vasquez reported from the Research Command Station. They've synthesized it into new configurations that exceed the original capabilities. They've become something greater than the sum of their conquests. The enemy force paused at the edge of the defensive zone, apparently analyzing the opposition they faced. For several tense minutes, both fleets studied each other across the vast emptiness of space, each side evaluating capabilities that operated beyond conventional understanding. Then, the communication came, not through electromagnetic transmission or quantum entanglement, but directly through consciousness interface that bypassed all technological intermediaries. The voice that spoke seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, carrying undertones of hundreds of absorbed civilizations. Unknown entities, you possess capabilities that exceed our projections for this stellar region. Identify your technological origins and prepare for absorption into our collective advancement. Resistance will result in suboptimal resource utilization. Admiral Chan responded through the same consciousness interface, her voice carrying the multidimensional resonance that human development had achieved. We are the Galactic Alliance, representing the evolutionary collaboration of species that choose advancement through cooperation rather than conquest. We reject absorption and defend the right of civilizations to determine their own development paths. The pause that followed seemed to stretch across dimensions. When the enemy responded, their voice carried notes of confusion and what might have been concern. Your consciousness configuration is unprecedented. You operate as separate entities while maintaining collective coordination. This development pattern was not observed in previous encounters. Explain your technological framework. Dr. Marillion, now existing in a hybrid state that allowed him to analyze multidimensional data streams, provided real-time intelligence to the fleet command. They're confused by our cooperative consciousness structure. Their absorption strategy assumes individual species development that can be isolated and incorporated. They don't understand how to process collaborative evolution. All units, initiate dimensional displacement combat protocols, Chen commanded. Around her, the joint fleet began demonstrating capabilities that the enemy couldn't have anticipated because they'd never existed before. Human ships flickered between dimensional states while maintaining perfect formation. Council vessels created probability barriers that deflected attacks across multiple timeline branches. Draconian battleships generated tactical illusions that existed in overlapping reality layers, making it impossible to determine which targets were real. The Quantum Collective's contributions operated on probability manipulation that turned enemy weapons against themselves. The battle that followed defied every conventional understanding of space combat. Attacks occurred across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Defensive strategies involved existing in quantum superposition until the optimal moment for manifestation. Ships fought while occupying the same spatial coordinates in different dimensional states, turning the battlefield into a complex puzzle of overlapping reality layers. Enemy adaptation rate is remarkable, Commander Zex reported while coordinating attacks that occurred in 17 different probability streams. They're developing countermeasures for each new tactic within minutes of first exposure. But, the Joint Fleet's development was proceeding even faster. The consciousness-linking technology that humanity had introduced allowed real-time sharing of tactical innovations across the entire fleet. New strategies developed by individual commanders were instantly available to all other units, creating a rate of tactical evolution that exceeded the enemy's adaptation capability. They're trying to absorb our technological characteristics through combat engagement, Dr. Vasquez warned. Each successful attack they make teaches them more about our capabilities. Then, we ensure they don't succeed often enough to complete the learning process, Chen replied grimly. The battle continued for 18 hours of subjective time, though the multidimensional nature of the engagement made temporal measurement problematic. Reality warped and shifted around the combatants as weapons that operated outside conventional physics clashed with defenses that existed in impossible configurations. Gradually, patterns emerged that revealed the fundamental difference between the opposing forces. The enemy achieved advancement through absorption and integration, becoming stronger by incorporating the capabilities of conquered civilizations. The Galactic Alliance achieved advancement through cooperation and synthesis, becoming more capable by combining different approaches to common challenges. They're individual in aggregate, many absorbed consciousnesses operating as one entity, Dr. Marillion observed during a brief tactical pause. We're collective in unity, separate consciousnesses choosing to coordinate while maintaining individual perspectives. Their strength comes from uniformity. Ours comes from diversity. The realization led to a strategic shift that exploited the enemy's fundamental limitation. Instead of fighting their absorption capability directly, the Alliance began demonstrating technological approaches that couldn't be absorbed because they required cooperative consciousness to function. Admiral Chen initiated the final phase of the battle plan. All units, implement Cooperative Transcendence Protocol. Show them capabilities that can only exist through chosen collaboration rather than forced absorption. The Joint Fleet began demonstrating technologies that required willing cooperation between different types of consciousness to function. Weapons that needed draconian strategic thinking and human dimensional manipulation and quantum collective probability analysis working together simultaneously. Defensive systems that only functioned when multiple species contributed their unique perspectives to collective decision-making. The enemy found themselves facing capabilities they couldn't absorb because absorption was antithetical to how these technologies functioned. They could destroy the Alliance fleet, but they couldn't incorporate their capabilities because forced integration eliminated the cooperative consciousness that made the technology possible. Enemy fleet is withdrawing, Commander Zex reported with amazement. They're actually retreating. The communication that came from the enemy carried tones that hadn't been present before: uncertainty and something that might have been respect. Your development pattern cannot be integrated into our advancement framework. Forced absorption eliminates the cooperative characteristics that enable your capabilities. This presents a logical contradiction in our expansion strategy. Admiral Chen seized the opportunity. Your approach assumes that advancement requires dominance. We've demonstrated that cooperation produces capabilities that absorption cannot achieve. Consider the possibility of development through alliance rather than conquest. The pause that followed lasted several minutes. When the enemy responded, their voice carried new harmonics that suggested internal debate among their absorbed consciousnesses. Proposal requires evaluation that exceeds current decision-making framework. Temporary cessation of expansion while alternative development strategies undergo analysis. This encounter has revealed limitations in our approach that require resolution. The enemy fleet vanished from normal space as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving the Galactic Alliance alone among the stars. The first direct confrontation with the galactic threat had ended not in destruction, but in the enemy's voluntary withdrawal to reconsider their entire approach to advancement. Did we just convince a galactic-scale threat to stop conquering civilizations and consider cooperation instead? Ambassador Kethvar asked in amazement. Admiral Chen smiled with satisfaction and exhaustion. We demonstrated something they couldn't absorb, the power of chosen cooperation over forced integration. Whether they'll actually change their approach remains to be seen, but we've bought the galaxy time to continue evolving. Dr. Marillion analyzed the aftermath with scientific precision. The encounter shows that our evolutionary path has produced capabilities that forced integration cannot replicate. We become something that can only exist through willing cooperation between diverse consciousness types. The galaxy had survived its first encounter with existential threat, but, more importantly, it had discovered that its chosen path of cooperative evolution produced advantages that conquest-based advancement couldn't match. The human emergence had triggered not just technological advancement, but the development of entirely new forms of consciousness that operated through collaboration rather than domination. As the joint fleet returned to base, everyone understood that the galaxy had crossed another threshold. The cooperation that began as a desperate response to external threat had evolved into something unprecedented, a multidimensional consciousness that maintained individual identity while achieving collective capability that exceeded what any single species could accomplish alone. Humanity's long isolation hadn't been preparation for conquest or even defense. It had been the development of consciousness forms that could serve as catalysts for galactic evolution. Their emergence hadn't just revealed hidden threats and offered protection, it had triggered the transformation of galactic civilization into something that could face any challenge through the power of chosen cooperation. The Voidborn ships that had once seemed like harbingers of unknown threat had become the foundation for a new form of existence that offered hope for continued advancement through diversity rather than uniformity. The galaxy's future remained uncertain, but it would face whatever came as a unified consciousness that had learned to transcend individual limitations through the strength that came from choosing to work together. Earth had finally answered the galaxy's invitation, and the response had changed everything forever.